What if the most intellectually rigorous diagnosis of government dysfunction of the last 80 years is 100% correct about the disease?
But it prescribes a medicine that will actually kill the patient.
Exactly. It's a chilling premise, honestly.
It really is, and it's the central tension of the essay we're unpacking for you today.
Right. So today's deep dive is focusing on a piece by Elias Kunis. It's called Libertarianism is an Incomplete Solution.
Yeah, and it sits inside this much larger theoretical framework he calls mechanism realism.
But before we go any further into the actual mechanics of this, we need to set a hard ground rule for you listening.
Always a good idea with this kind of topic.
Right, because the essay is this very unsparing structural critique of state governance, modern democracy, and libertarian political philosophy.
Which are obviously highly charged political territories.
Very much so. So just to be clear, we are not taking sides. We are not endorsing any political theories today, whether they lean left, right, or center.
Our mission is strictly analytical. We just want to take apart the architecture of Kunis's argument.
Because the way he constructs it, and, well, the way it challenges conventional wisdom, is just fascinating.
It really is. I mean, the author asks us to look at the state not as a moral entity, but as an engineering project, basically a machine.
And to understand where the libertarian solution goes wrong, he argues you first have to look at exactly where their diagnosis of that machine goes completely right.
So let's open the hood, right? Let's look at the engine.
Yeah, let's do it. So Kunis essentially starts by validating the libertarian critique of the state.
He does. He argues their diagnosis of government failure is incredibly accurate.
And he says it relies on four well-established economic and political realities, the first one being public choice theory.
Right, which basically strips away the romanticism of public service.
Which is what, exactly, like the idea that politicians are just perfectly altruistic.
Exactly. Public choice theory suggests that politicians and bureaucrats are not these perfect guardians of the public good. They are rational actors.
Optimizing for their own incentives, right?
Yeah, like a legislator wants to get reelected. A department head wants to expand their budget and their staff.
Right. So when a senator fights to keep some obsolete military base open in their home state,
They aren't necessarily doing it for national security. They're doing it to secure local jobs and, their own political survival.
so the system is just run by humans responding to human incentives.
Exactly. Self-interest in government. That's problem number one.
But let's say, just hypothetically, we could magically replace every politician with a perfectly altruistic, angelic public servant.
Right. Someone who only cares about the greater good.
According to his second point, the Hayekian knowledge problem, they would still fail, wouldn't they?
Oh, absolutely. Because a centralized group simply cannot process the sheer volume of data required to manage a complex economy.
The information processing bottleneck is just insurmountable.
Yeah, I mean, in a free market, prices act as this decentralized information network.
Right, so if the price of copper goes up, millions of actors instantly adjust their behavior.
Exactly. And they don't need a central planner to tell them there's a copper shortage.
But a centralized state apparatus, no matter how well-intentioned, lacks those real-time granular feedback loops.
Right. By the time a government agency gathers the data, analyzes it, and drafts a policy to address a shortage.
The reality on the ground has entirely shifted.
Completely. And then you add the third reality to that, which is regulatory capture.
Oh, we see this one constantly. The classic revolving door.
Yep. An agency is created to regulate a specific industry, say banking or pharmaceuticals.
But the only people who have the technical expertise to actually understand the industry are the people who work in it.
Right. So over time, the regulated industry essentially takes control of the regulating body.
And they end up shaping the rules to create barriers to entry for competitors rather than, actually protecting the consumer.
Exactly. And tying all of this together is the fourth point, which is known as the democratic ratchet.
The one-way street of state growth.
Yeah. Because in a democratic system, there is a tremendous political incentive to distribute concentrated benefits to a specific group.
While diffusing the costs across the much broader tax base.
Right. But once a public benefit or a subsidy is granted, taking it away becomes absolute political suicide.
Because the constituency that relies on that benefit will vote single-mindedly to keep it.
While the average taxpayer barely even notices the fractional cost. So obligations only ratchet in one direction, which is up.
Okay, so looking at those four mechanisms, public choice, the knowledge problem, regulatory capture, and the democratic ratchet.
Kunis draws this core realization from them. He says state dysfunction is completely structural.
Right. It's not about a lack of morality or electing the wrong party. The machine itself is just wired to produce catastrophic information feedback loops.
It operates independently of the moral virtue of the operator.
It's kind of like taking your car to a brilliant mechanic,
Yep.
right? And he perfectly maps out every failing gear, every cracked belt, and every leaky valve in your engine.
Yeah, and it's incredibly validating to hear.
Right. You're sitting there thinking, finally, someone actually sees why this thing keeps stalling out.
But then the mechanic just wipes his hands and says the only way to fix the car is to take the engine out entirely and throw it away.
Exactly. The essay argues that libertarians correctly identify that the state's engine is running haywire.
But because they believe the engine is fundamentally unfixable, because of those 4 structural flaws we just talked about, their only prescription is amputation.
Shrink the state. Minimize it to its absolute lowest possible footprint.
Right. And if the engine is truly unfixable, based on everything we just discussed, throwing it away seems like, well, the only logical choice.
But Kunis argues this is a trap.
He does. He says it is an illusion created by what he calls a truncated option set.
Meaning what exactly?
He suggests our entire mainstream political debate is traps on a very flat, 2-dimensional axis.
Okay.
So option 1 is the political left, pushing for more state. And option 2 is the political right, specifically libertarians, pushing for less state.
And when you look closely at option 1 and realize that adding more fuel to a structurally broken engine only creates larger explosions,
Option 2 appears to be the only rational conclusion left on the board.
it kind of just wins by default.
Exactly. But Kunis introduces a missing option 3. He calls it telocracy.
Telocracy. The word comes from the Greek telos, meaning ultimate object or aim, right?
Right. Telocracy is governance with an explicit objective function derived from physics and thermodynamics.
Using a fundamentally better feedback architecture. But wait, an objective function derived from physics sounds incredibly dense.
Yeah, it does.
Let's ground that a bit for the listener. What does it actually mean to govern based on physics rather than politics?
Well, in traditional politics, the objective function is just whatever wins the next election or boosts the quarterly GDP.
Right, it's short-term and highly subjective.
Exactly. But in physics, an objective function might be minimizing entropy or maximizing the long-term structural integrity of a system.
Oh, I see. So telocracy applies that to civilization.
Right. The goal isn't ideological. The goal is to maintain the fundamental energy and capital systems required for a complex society to actually survive over centuries, not just election cycles.
That makes a lot of sense. And to explain why we couldn't see this third option before, Kunis makes this really brilliant mathematical comparison.
Oh, the Abel-Ruffini theorem. Yeah, this is great.
Right. He compares the libertarian proof of state failure to this specific moment in the history of mathematics.
So back in the 1800s, mathematicians proved conclusively that there is no general algebraic formula that can solve a quintic equation.
Which is an equation where x is to the 5th power.
Right. And the proof was airtight. There was no debating it.
However, it was only airtight within its limited vocabulary of basic polynomials.
Exactly. Decades later, Everest Galois invented Galois theory, which just completely expanded the mathematical problem space.
So the original Abel-Ruffini theorem was still true within its old, narrow boundaries.
But Galois showed that with a larger toolkit, you could understand and navigate the problem entirely differently.
I see where this is going. Libertarians are basically the mathematicians from the 1800s.
Yeah, they aren't necessarily wrong based on the tools they had at the time.
They proved central planning doesn't work using the primitives of bureaucratic management, fiat currency, and, slow-moving democratic elections.
Exactly. Less state is the locally correct answer, only when fixing the state isn't in your conceptual vocabulary.
Because the libertarian proofs are valid, but valid proofs within a bounded vocabulary do not prove impossibility in an expanded one.
That's the crux of it. Kunis argues that mechanism design, computational governance, and new technologies have expanded the governance problem space in the exact same way Galois theory expanded math.
Right. We have new tools now. Real-time data sensors, cryptographic verification, smart contracts, algorithmic auditing.
Things that literally didn't exist when Friedrich Hayek was writing.
We actually have the engineering capacity now to build feedback loops that bypass the flaws of human bureaucracy entirely.
We do. But let's play devil's advocate for a second.
Okay.
For the listener who's thinking, okay, maybe we can build a better engine now, but why bother?
Right. If the state is so uniquely dangerous and prone to capture, why risk it? Just let the free market handle things.
Exactly. What is the actual danger of just amputating the state?
And the essay hits its hardest critique right here, doesn't it?
It does. It argues that option 2, less state, destroys the very substrate required for large-scale coordination.
Because markets do not exist in a vacuum.
No, they don't. Even staunch libertarians acknowledge the need for a basic night watchman state to enforce contracts and protect private property.
But Kunis pushes that logic much further. He points out that markets fundamentally cannot coordinate things with extremely long time horizons.
And they are notoriously blind to negative externalities.
Right. Things like the depletion of the environmental commons or long-term demographic collapse.
Exactly. The author identifies 6 crucial capital stocks that any surviving civilization absolutely relies on.
Okay, what are they?
There is demographic capital, social capital, institutional capital, cognitive capital, physical infrastructure, and the environmental commons.
Wow. Okay, and these stocks require active, constant maintenance.
They do. And this is exactly where the market mechanism falls short, because markets rely on prices to communicate value,
Right. If there's a shortage of lumber, the price of lumber goes up.
which signals people to plant more trees or find alternatives.
But the market doesn't assign a price signal to social trust.
No, it doesn't. There's no ticker symbol for institutional memory or the cognitive development of a population.
And since there are no price signals for these vital elements, they are practically invisible to a purely free market.
They simply depreciate unmonitored.
Think of it like running a manufacturing business, right? But you only track the daily cash in the register.
Right, and you're completely ignoring the fact that your factory roof has severe water damage.
Exactly. Your heavy machinery hasn't been serviced in 5 years, and your best engineers are burning out and quitting.
But the quarterly spreadsheet looks highly profitable.
Right up until the Tuesday, the roof caves in, and the company ceases to exist.
That blind spot is profound. And Kunis suggests this is exactly why mid-20th century libertarian thinkers, like Hayek and Milton Friedman, completely missed the danger.
Because when they were formulating their theories, those invisible capital stocks like social trust, functioning institutions, high civic engagement, they were essentially full.
They were abundant. Hayek could take baseline social cooperation for granted because he lived in an era that was coasting on generations of built-up social capital.
The well was full, so they never really had to think about how the water actually got there.
But the well is now visibly running dry.
Yeah.
Kunis argues that a civilization that solely optimizes its financial and physical capital through market mechanisms
While letting its social, cognitive, and demographic capital erode.
is just drawing down its civilizational balance sheet. You're cannibalizing your foundation and calling it economic growth.
So amputation kills the patient by destroying the invisible capital stocks.
Right, the market won't build them, and without a coordination mechanism, they evaporate.
So we finally arrive at option 3, the surgery.
Yes.
What does telocracy actually look like in practice? How do we rewire the engine so it maintains those capital stocks without falling into the trap of public choice theory and regulatory capture?
Well, the author claims that telocracy actually achieves libertarian goals far better than libertarianism itself does.
Really? How so?
Take the goal of minimizing the discretionary power of politicians. The libertarian method is to slash budgets and abolish ministries.
Which we just established destroys the required substrate.
Exactly. The telecratic method is to replace human discretion with automatic constitutional constraints.
Meaning the rules trigger mechanically regardless of who happens to be sitting in the Oval Office or Parliament.
Exactly that. Telocracy introduces what Kunis calls a fourth branch of government, a mechanism authority.
Okay, a fourth branch. What does it do?
Its sole purpose is to measure the capital stocks that markets cannot price, and to act as a hard constraint on the legislative and executive branches.
Wait, I can look at a stock ticker to see the price of a company. How does this fourth branch objectively measure something as nebulous as social trust or cognitive capital?
Right.
Without it just becoming another subjective political opinion manipulated by whoever is in charge?
It is the most critical question. And the answer is you don't measure social trust by asking politicians how they feel things are going.
Okay.
You measure it through an algorithmic index of hard proxy metrics.
Yeah.
You track contract litigation rates. Like, are people suing each other more often because a handshake no longer works?
Oh, that's really interesting.
You track the velocity of institutional processing, demographic replacement rates, participation in civic structures.
And real-time behavioral economics data.
Right. It is not a single subjective dial. It is a cryptographic, verifiable index of civilizational health.
And the essay points to a real world, albeit kind of primitive, prototype for this kind of mechanical constraint, right? The Swiss debt brake.
Yes, the Swiss debt brake. It's a constitutional mechanism that automatically restricts government spending based on revenue.
It basically forces a balanced budget over the economic cycle.
Right. It mathematically removes a politician's ability to endlessly borrow money to fund today's consumption.
And it has been incredibly successful at stabilizing their fiscal capital, hasn't it?
It has. But Kunis points out a massive blind spot, even in the Swiss model.
Which perfectly illustrates why we need the full fourth branch.
Exactly. The Swiss debt brake only constrains fiscal capital. It doesn't distinguish between consumption, like paying for daily bureaucratic operations, and actual investment, like repairing a bridge or funding research.
Oh, I see. So when politicians are mathematically squeezed by the debt brake, what do they cut?
They cut the infrastructure spending, they delay maintenance.
Because cutting a popular subsidy loses you the election in 6 months?
Right. But the bridge won't collapse for another 10 years, long after you've safely retired.
So they deplete one capital stock, unpriced future infrastructure, to preserve another, current political favor.
And that proves the ultimate point. A single automatic constraint on money just isn't enough.
You need full, simultaneous accounting across all capital types.
Yes. The fourth branch has to monitor the whole balance sheet so politicians can't steal from the future to pay for the present.
Okay, I have to step in here and voice the skepticism you listening are probably feeling right about now.
Let's hear it.
If we build this incredibly powerful mechanism authority, this fourth branch, to measure all these capital stocks and override elected officials.
Who builds it?
Right. And more importantly, what stops this fourth branch from becoming captured by industry?
Or becoming just another bloated, self-serving bureaucracy.
Haven't we just created the ultimate regulatory capture target?
It's a fair point, and Kunis addresses this head-on. His thesis is that these are engineering problems, and they have strict engineering answers. You do not rely on the goodness of the people stashing the fourth branch. You design against capture through institutional architecture.
Give me the blueprints. How do you engineer an uncapturable institution?
First, constitutional independence. They operate completely outside the standard legislative cycle.
Okay.
Second, international oversight. You bring in foreign auditing bodies who have zero local political ties, no network loyalties.
And no skin in the local game to constantly evaluate the methodology. That makes sense.
Third, and this is perhaps the most crucial one, capital funding.
Meaning they aren't dependent on an annual budget from the legislature.
Exactly. If politicians control your budget year to year, they control you.
Right.
By funding the mechanism authority with a permanent capital endowment, you remove the threat of political defunding.
So the legislature can't threaten to shut off the lights if the fourth branch restricts their spending.
Exactly. And finally, you rely on automatic triggers. The constraints fire mathematically based on the data streams.
Utilizing smart contracts and algorithmic execution.
Yes. It bypasses human discretion entirely.
Making regulatory capture structurally unproductive. Because even if a special interest group somehow managed to bribe an auditor,
The mathematical trigger still fires based on the decentralized data inputs.
the design ensures that the feedback loops remain closed and functional, independent of the individual agents operating within them.
It completely neutralizes the public choice theory problem.
Man, let's distill this entire journey.
It's a lot, I know.
Libertarianism might be the most important intellectual tradition that almost nobody fully adopts in practice.
Right, because people intuitively realize that completely removing the state destroys the coordination capacity required for a complex civilization to actually survive.
It diagnosed the disease perfectly. The state's feedback loops are genuinely broken, but it prescribed amputation.
And with the advent of modern mechanism design and computational governance, we can finally attempt surgery.
We can preserve that vital coordination capacity while rewiring the feedback loops to actually reflect physical reality, rather than just political convenience.
We don't have to choose between a broken engine and no engine at all. We can build a better control system.
Well said. And we are going to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
The essay warns about the acute danger of managing only what has a price tag, while quietly ignoring the invisible capital stocks that keep everything standing.
So look at your own life, your team, or your company. Are you obsessively managing the immediate metrics,
The daily output, the quarterly revenue, the things with easy prices.
while quietly letting your cognitive capital, your social trust, or your physical health depreciate?
What would a fourth branch full accounting look like for you?
Because identifying your own unpriced capital is the first step to preserving it before the well runs dry.
Exactly.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Remember, the patient doesn't need to lose a limb. They just need a better surgeon. Catch you next time.